How many times have you wished you could create a rollup summary field inside of a Salesforce Flow? Rollup summary fields are powerful, but sometimes you can't use them because two objects aren't in a master detail relationship. What do we do then? In this video, we'll cover how to build a rollup summary using the flow builder that counts the number of tasks related to a lead. This is a perfect example of building a rollup summary with a Salesforce Flow that you can use in your own Salesforce org. Hey everyone, we are going to get started by building our rollup summary here in Salesforce. So I have a Trailhead environment open, and if you want to follow along, I'd recommend you also open up a Trailhead environment. But I'm here on a lead object, and this is Miss Betty Bear. I think that's a typo, it should be Blair. But anyway, Betty is a lead in Salesforce, and she has 3 tasks on her lead record. So you can see these here. And our business, in this case, we'll just pretend we work at Universal Containers. There's a custom field here called number of tasks, and I just made that on the lead record. So you might want to go do that if you're going to follow along, but if not, just know that we are going to be populating this number of tasks field with the count of the actual tasks. And right now there are 3. And so a rollup summary field in Salesforce will keep track of something that you're counting. And so that could be, the total number of records, or let's say you're working with opportunities, it could be the sum of the amounts. And in this case, it's just going to be a real simple count. And so what our flow has to do is it has to, whenever a new task is created, get the count of tasks on the lead, and then just update that on the lead. And there's different approaches to this, but I'll show you mine, and then you can take it and change it if you need to. So I'm actually going to do some field creation before we go to the flow builder. I'm going to click the gear icon here and press setup. And I'm going to create 2 fields on the activity object. And you might be wondering, like, why do I need activity fields? And you'll see why as we go through and create our flow. So I've navigated to the object manager. I've gone to activities, and now I'm going to create 2 new fields under fields and relationships. And I'm going to press new. And this will be a formula field. In fact, they're both going to be formula fields. I'll press next. I'm going to call this what ID text, which is a little bit unusual name, but you'll see why as we go through this video. And the formula return type will be the text formula type. I'll press next. And then what I need to do here is just press insert field. And then I'm going to scroll down to related to ID, which is down here. And you can see that the API name of the related to ID field is called the what ID. And so I'm going to insert that there. And what this formula is doing is just taking whatever the related to ID is and is just outputting that into a text. And this will be helpful for filtering inside of our flow. So I'm going to press next and just make it visible for everybody. Press next. I don't need to add it to any layouts, so I'll uncheck those boxes. And then I'm going to press save and new. And so we're going to make another formula field. And so I'll click formula from the data type, and I'll press next. And this will be called who ID text. So very, very similar to the first one, but this is just the who ID. So the return type for the formula will be text, and I will press next. And I'm going to click insert field and scroll down, and I'm looking for the name field. So you can see that there's a name ID here. And when we look at the API name, that's the who ID. So again, I'll just press insert. And now we have a formula that will take the ID of whatever's in the name field on the task and render that as just a text output. And so I'll press next. And again, you'll see why that's important in our flow here in a second. I'll make it visible for everyone and press next. I'm going to hide it from the layouts, and then I'll press save. And so now that we've created those 2 fields, let's briefly go back to the lead record. And I just want to point out to you why we did that. When you are building a rollup summary, the most important thing you need to understand is the relationship between the 2 objects that you're trying to summarize. So in this case, leads and tasks are not in a master detail relationship, but they do have a lookup field on the task object that can point to a lead. So I'm going to open up this 3 task here, this 3rd task, and we'll just look at it in a new tab. And you can see that there are 2 fields over here on the right, which is kind of unique to tasks, but either the name or the related to could point at a lead record. And in this case, what we need to do is consider that both of these fields could potentially have the lead in it, and we need to be able to count all of the tasks where Betty Bear or Betty Blair is either in the name or in the related to field. And so that's just important to know. Whenever you're making a rollup summary, understand exactly how your child object, in this case the task, is related to your parent object, in this case the lead, because that is how you are going to query for them inside the flow builder. And I want to point out something unique about these tasks right here, but you can see that only the name field is populated. And so if we go look at the other activities like the 2 task and the 1 task, the first and second tasks, again, only the name field is pointing to the lead. So that's good to know. Let's go and start building our flow. So I'm going to open up the setup menu here, and I'll just type in flows to the quick find. We'll navigate over, click flows, and then I'm going to press new flow. And we want this to be a record triggered flow. And so we'll do record triggered flow here, and we'll press create. And we're going to trigger this on the task object. So what we want to have happen is when a new task is created, we want to update the count on the lead record. So in this case, we'll just select a task, and we'll say when a record is created. And this is where we have to define the entry conditions. And so this is really helpful, and this is why we created those 2 formula fields. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that all the conditions are met. And I will say that the field on the task, and that's going to be the new field that we just created, called the Who ID text. So I'll scroll all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to use this Who ID text field. And I want this text to start with, and that's going to be the prefix of the lead record. And so what I mean by that is if we go look at the lead record in Salesforce, you'll notice in the URL that the ID of the lead record is there. Every lead in Salesforce starts with 00Q. So I can use that information to define my entry criteria for my flow. So let's go back to the flow builder here. And I'm just going to say that whenever a task is created and the Who ID text starts with 00Q, then I know for a fact that this task is related to a lead, and I want to go update that lead with the count of tasks. I'll leave this as actions and related records and press done. And so now we have our criteria to kick off our flow, where when a task is created and that task using our new formula field shows that it's related to a lead, then we want our flow to run. And the reason we have to use the formula field there is because if we try to use that starts with operator just on the name ID itself, Salesforce will throw an error. So let's take the next step here. We have our task, and what we want to do is we want to go get the count of all the other tasks that are potentially related to the lead. So I'm going to click add an element here, and I'm going to say get, and we'll do a get records, and we'll say get other tasks related to lead. And so I need to look for records of a particular object, and in this case that's the task object. So I'm going to search for tasks, and I want to find all the other tasks where the name ID of the task, so the Who ID of the task, equals, and that's going to be the same. It's going to be the same record as the lead that this task is related to. And that might be a little bit confusing, but we're basically saying, hey, this task, like the start condition of the flow says this task was created and it's related to a lead. And so now our next step is our get records element, and it's going to say go find every other task that has the same lead ID as the task that kicked off this flow. And that's what we're defining here. And so I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and I'm just going to select Who ID again. So we're saying go find all the other tasks where the name ID equals the same name ID as the task that kicked off our flow. And in this case, that's the lead. We're going to store all of those records, and we do that by selecting how many records to store, and we press all records and press done. And that's all we have to do there. So the next step is we need to get the count of all of those tasks. So let's click open the toolbox over here on the left, and then I'm going to click New Resource. And under Resource Type, I'm going to create a variable resource type, and we're just going to call this count. And so this variable will represent the count of tasks. And it's not going to have any value to start, but we are going to populate this variable using the count of our get records. And I'll show you how we do that in a second. So under data type, I'm going to press or select the number data type. Decimal places we will put to 0 because it's not possible to have a fraction of a task. And then for default value for this count, I'm going to set it to 0. That way it's just at 0 by default. We'll press done. And we've now created our variable that can be used to represent or hold the value of the count. And so now we need to populate this count variable with the actual number of the tasks that we found. So we'll do that next. And we'll do that by adding an element to the canvas here. And we're going to add the assignment element. So I'll click that. And I'm going to say set count variable. That'll be the name of this assignment element. So under the variable values, I'm going to select count. And then I'm going to use the unique operator here called equals count. And we're going to say that the count variable will equal the count of, and then I'm going to select the record collection variable created by our get records element when we looked up all the related tasks. And I'm going to press, I guess, somewhere else on the screen so that this populates. And then I will press done. And so now what we've done is we've kicked off our flow when a task is created and that task is related to a lead. We've then used the lead ID that's on the originating task to go find any other task that has that same lead ID. We took the count of the records that we found and we've now assigned them to a variable. And so now we need to use that variable to update the original lead. So the way we're going to do that is by adding a final element to the canvas here. And we are going to say that we are going to update some records. So I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom and select update records. And I'm going to say update related lead. And so I'm going to pick the third option here called use the IDs and, oh wait, no, sorry. I'm going to pick the fourth option, which is specify conditions to update or to identify records and then set the fields individually. And we want to update records of the lead type. And the condition will be that the ID of the lead we're trying to update equals the who ID of our task, which matches both our entry criteria and the criteria we used to go and find other tasks related to the lead. And so now we've defined which lead we're going to update, and now we need to define the field values that we're going to set. And we're going to do that by just searching through the fields, and I want to find that number of tasks field here. And for the value, I'm going to set this to equal our count, so that after our flow runs all the way through and we find the number of tasks, we'll take that count and we'll just enter it onto the lead, which is related to our task that kicked off the flow. And I'll press done. And so I'm going to save this flow, and we'll just call it task update lead count. I'm going to put in parentheses create and press save. And so in a rollup summary, when you're counting records, you need to be able to increase the count when a new task gets made. But if a task ever gets deleted, you also need to decrease the count. And so what we're going to do here is handle that second scenario right now. So I'm going to close out the toolbox, and what I mean by this, just so that we're all on the same page, is that right now, inside our Salesforce environment, we're only increasing the count when a task record is created. But if a task record gets deleted, then we need to make sure that the count goes down. And so I have saved this flow as the task update lead count create. I'm going to press activate. And I'm just going to copy this flow. And the way we're going to do that is by pressing save as. We're going to save this as a new flow. Actually, I'm going to copy the flow label here first so that we have task update lead count create. And I'm clicking this new flow button. And so this is going to duplicate everything that we've built on our flow. And I'm just going to put in parentheses here, delete. And so we'll save that. And now we have an entirely new flow that's for the delete. And so we need to make a couple changes to this newly created delete flow in order to make sure that it fires, and rather than increase the count by 1, it decreases the count by 1 whenever a task is deleted. So the first and kind of most intuitive thing that we need to do is open up the start element. And here we need to change the trigger condition from when a task record is created to when a task record is deleted. And so that's the first most important thing, is that we need to switch it like when the flow runs. So we'll do that. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to update our get other tasks related to the lead. And so we're going to change this. So I just double clicked, open that get records. And what we need to say here is that we're going to go out when a task is deleted, we're going to go find every single task related to that lead. But what we need to do is add in a criteria that is deleted equals false. And we also need to add in a criteria that the ID of the task that we want to find does not equal the ID of the record that triggered our flow, because we don't want to count the task record that triggered the flow as part of the tasks that exist on the lead, because that task is being deleted. And now that I'm thinking about it, we might also want to go back and add this is deleted criteria to our other flow, our create flow. At any rate, once these two are there, we can press done and we can press save. And that should be it in terms of changes that we need to make. So I'll press activate. And then real quick, I'm going to go back to our flow tab here. I'm going to press refresh. And then I'm going to open up that create flow. And I'm just going to add in that is deleted equals false criteria, because I want to make sure that the flows are working properly before we deploy them. So I've navigated back here to the update lead count create flow. And I'm just going to add a single criteria here into the get other tasks related to lead get element. And that condition will be is deleted equals false. This way, when we're counting tasks, we aren't counting deleted tasks as part of the lead record. So I'll press done, and then I'll click save as, new version, and we'll activate the flow. So we are now ready to test. Normally we could do this in a debug window, but I figure we could also just do it by going back to the lead. So I'm going to go back to Miss Betty Blair's lead record, refresh the page here. And if we look at the number of tasks, we have our 3 tasks here. And I don't know, yeah, it looks like the number 3 is there. But what we need to do by testing this is just add a new task. So let's press new task, and we'll call this the 4 task. This will be the 4th task in the lead. And I'll just put the due date out towards the end of July and press save. And so now we'll have 4 tasks related to our lead. If I press view more, it looks like we have 5 tasks here, but that's just a bug in the UI. If I press refresh here on the screen and then click view more again, you see that in fact we only have 4 tasks. And if I open up the details here, you see that the number of tasks field has gone up by 1 to the number 4. So that's great. When we add a task to a lead, the number of tasks goes up by 1. And now we need to test the opposite way, which is by deleting that number 4 task. So I'll click the drop down here and press delete. We want to make sure that that field goes down to 3. And we see that there's only 3 tasks here, which means our delete was successful. But if I go look at the details, do I also see 3? And we do. And so that means that our delete flow is also working. So now if you add a task or delete a task, the number of tasks field gets incremented or decremented based on which operation you're doing. So some key takeaways before we wrap things up here is that our flow is working and it's doing the rollup and count appropriately, which is perfect. However, it's really important for us to note, and I'm going to open up a task here, that we've configured our entire flows to run on this name field. So the label is the name, and then the backend ID, the API name, is the who ID. This other field here, related to, is called related to, and then the API name is the what ID. Right now, our rollup only works if the lead is related to the name. which could be fine, and for the purpose of this video is really helpful in understanding how to do a rollup. If you have a scenario where you prefer to use the related to rather than the name, then you would need to go update these flows, and I'll open up one of the flows, so that in all the places inside the flow that we reference the who ID, and that would be here in the first condition, it would be here in the get other records, where we're looking at the who ID and the name, and then finally in the update records, where we look at the name ID, you would need to change all of those from pointing at the who ID to point at the what ID. And so that's just a really important distinction, especially with the tasks. You need to understand whether your task record will be related to a lead through the name ID or through the related to ID. And once you understand that, then you can decide which way to configure your flow. Finally, this is probably more advanced than we have time for here, but it is possible that you could have a task record where the name or the related to is the lead. And in that case, you would really want to count both. And so there's a couple different ways to do that, but it would primarily involve updating your get records here in order to count both types of tasks. So you would find, I'll open this up, you would want to create a condition where either the who ID or the what ID equals that lead that's in your original task. And so I want you to think about that, and if you are unsure, leave me a comment below and take a guess as to how you would build it, and then I can let you know if you're right or not. But with all that said, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.